Good evening, Forest community members. I hope you are all well, and I'm sure that we've got parents and carers joining us this evening. Most importantly, I do hope we also have pupils watching this webinar. And before I introduce our speakers this evening, I just want to say and remind you that we have got no more webinars this half term, because half term is drawing very close. But our first webinar back after half term will be on Wednesday, the 11th of June, and you'll have your usual notification in the end of week bulletin. And that will focus on promoting healthy masculinity, and that will be led by the Voice Box team. So again, another really diverse topic that we're offering parents and carers and of course pupils to access as part of this series. This evening, this topic has actually come from the academic leadership team as a priority, but also this topic has come from a recurring theme in our wellbeing surveys, where pupils have said this is not just necessarily a stressful time during the exam week, which is upcoming for most of the community, and year 11s and year 13s are now starting their final exams, but actually it could be something that's happening daily. So we really want to give some top tips and share some real insight from even a special guest this morning, which is one of our Stephen, which is one of our year 12 and 13 pupils. So I'm going to pass on over to Miss Mackie, who is our Deputy Head of Academic from the middle school, and she is a member of the academic leadership team. She's going to be leading our webinar this evening. So I'm going to hand over to her. Wishing you a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Miss Milton. Okay, welcome parents, carers, students to this evening's webinar on From Stress to Success, Managing Academic Anxiety. So unfortunately, stress is on the rise among young people nationally, and this can take many different forms and have a range of causes. But in this webinar, I'll be focusing specifically on stress around academics. Although academic anxiety can be present throughout the school year, it is particularly prevalent during exam season, hence the timing of this webinar, which aims to explore both stress throughout the year and the challenges presented by exams. I hope that by the end of this webinar, you will go away with an understanding of what we are doing to help students to manage stress, an insight into what the student experience might be, and some practical strategies that you can try. The content that I'll be covering is based on recurring themes that I've encountered during my time in teaching, and most recently as a Deputy Head of Middle School Academic, a role that was established in 2021 to help to support students with their academic journeys. Through doing this role, I've had countless conversations with students, parents, carers, other teachers and professionals about what their concerns are and what the possible solutions are when it comes to stress around studying. It's important to note that no two people are the same. They all come with their own unique set of circumstances and views about the world, and what works for one young person might not work for another. But my hope is that through understanding the science behind stress and the possible solutions, students can reflect on their own experiences and identify strategies which might work for them. These ideas therefore underpin many of the Teaching and Learning Thursday tutor time sessions, which students in the middle school explore as part of the personal development curriculum. The theme of stress is also covered in RSHE more generally to really embed these ideas and give students a language in which to discuss and explore how they're feeling. In this session, I'll outline some of the concepts explored in middle school teaching and learning sessions so that you can carry on these conversations at home. As has been mentioned, there is no panacea for stress, but the ideas I will discuss are based on what we have found to help and on what our young people have told us. Speaking of which, pupil voice is hugely important to us. In fact, it was feedback in a pupil wellbeing survey that led to this webinar being organised. We know that we can learn a huge amount from our young people, who are the ones going through these experiences day to day. So before I begin my presentation, we're going to hear from the brilliant Sophie, who will share a pupil perspective on her experiences of stress, how her strategies for managing stress have evolved, and her main tips. Sophie is currently in year 12 and is just taking on the mantle of Deputy Head Girl following the departure of year 13 last week. So I'm going to pass you over to Sophie now.
Thank you very much, everyone, for coming tonight, and for Miss Mackie for inviting me on. I'm really glad to be back to speak a bit more about teenage stress, exams, and all of the complications that come along with it. This slide I actually stole from the last webinar we did. with a couple of minor additions, well, not so minor additions really, of applying and getting a role on the student leadership team and also learning how to drive. That last one's a bit more of a fun fact, but also a warning for you guys to stay off the roads. Arguably, this month has been one of the hardest yet. I've had a lot on and a steady build up ahead. Just to give you a sort of idea, I have mocks coming up that will give me university predicted grades. I have a driving test looming, assemblies on bullying, assemblies on misogyny, preparing for the hockey season, UCAT exams for medical school, medical work experience, work at the hairdressers, and dare I even try to have a social life. Academic stress is hard because it's unavoidable, and everyone around you is going through it in completely different ways at the same time. For some people, it's their first exposure to a very stressful environment, and for others, it is just another thing. I just must make it clear that me sharing my experiences doesn't mean that I fully fixed coping with stress. Maybe not according to my mum, but I feel like I've gotten a bit better. But I do still get stressed, and ultimately, I'm not trying to eliminate that. I'm trying to be in a space where I'm productive and motivated, but I'm not at a point of anxiousness, which would disturb my day-to-day. And that is a really fine line, especially as a teenager where hormones are playing havoc constantly and every day is different. So I've come up with a sort of 4-step guide that I use to deal with stress. Coping mechanisms like going for a walk, meeting friends, or having a bath are great quick fixes. Super useful for a tough day and in the middle of exam season pressure. But finding ways to adapt more long-term are really important. These 4 steps make me able sometimes to tackle increased stress and work towards bigger goals. So that is recognizing, accepting, understanding, and adapting. Negative stress is when well-being and performance is being affected. I attended a talk recently, and the speaker asked the audience what they would prefer, to be stressed all the time or to be bored all the time. And despite me currently speaking in a webinar about stress and how to deal with it, I would still rather be stressed than be bored. Stress can be really great when you get it right. And it's all about finding that balance because ultimately, stressed or not, we all act like this at some point or another. So spotting one of these signs in a person doesn't mean that something is 100% up, but keeping a subtle, watchful eye can be really useful. I definitely find that I have patterns in stressful periods. It used to be that I would go on a baking frenzy and I wouldn't even make anything half decent. It was an indicator that I couldn't switch off and I couldn't relax. And new habits are always formed to deal with these kind of periods, sometimes good habits and sometimes bad. GCSEs was when I discovered iced coffee. It got me so much more focused for the day and it helped me power through the endless study. I know that when I have my coffee, it's time to gear up and get engaged. But equally, I like things like a tiny bit of dark chocolate or a bath to know when it's time to relax as well. These aren't necessarily habits that are bad for me, but I have to ensure that I don't take it too far. So for example, I will only have 1 coffee a day and that is it. So I make sure that it doesn't become my lifeline. When I'm stressed, I often come across like my mind is in 5 places at once. And that is often because it is. Others might clam up, they might become a bit more grumpy or less sociable. And it's even harder to deal with stress when every person is showing stress and dealing with it in a completely different way. For example, standing on the court before my GCSE exam, there were people laughing and jumping on top of each other. There were some people reading through flashcards, other people were talking about the fact they hadn't revised and they were about to fail, and some people were looking really content and happy. And often, everyone feels like they aren't fitting the profile that they should be, and that's okay. All of these profiles are fine. And there's literally a time that I had to leave my friends because the way that they were dealing with their stress was making mine worse. And that's okay. Not holding the profile that you think is most respectable is fine. Each person's way of dealing with stress is justified. We just have to find ways that allows us to deal with it without hurting ourselves. And just remember that every single person lies about how much revision they're doing. And I mean everyone. Ultimately, what we often forget at school is that it's a place to make mistakes. You shouldn't have to suppress every negative emotion. Feel it, accept it, and then you can fix it. All of the end of year exams, the homeworks, the topics tests, the matches and the training, it builds into what you know about yourself, what you know about how you revise, and also what might trigger anxiousness. But when we get to GCSEs and A-levels, it can feel like that is the final result. That is what everything has been building towards. It's the test of how good we really are. Will we reach the standards, or will we let ourselves and those around us down? Sometimes pressure and stress can be confused, and they do often go hand in hand, however, can be dealt with completely differently. In my head, I associate pressure with being out of control. So getting prepared and trusting myself can really help to remove pressure. But for people who deal with stress by shutting down, that means the pressure can multiply and their goals can begin to feel further and further away from them. And that is incredibly hard to deal with. But Forest has loads of support to get to a good place. Lots of sixth form pupils like myself are tutoring younger pupils. We have teachers who will always be willing to answer questions, including giving you a revision advice or helping you make a revision timetable. I know that it can feel embarrassing to ask for help, but ultimately everyone is here because they want to help you. So use it. Accepting your stress is the first part to getting the tools to help yourself. Forest will provide you with all of these tools, but you have to want to use them. Seeing exams as these huge events surrounded by stress and pressure is normal. And when during my GCSEs, I felt like it had to be. So I would continue to work hard. I needed that anxiousness as motivation. But looking back now, removing the pressure on myself and reframing my thoughts to instill a self-trust might have been a bit more beneficial. Around exam times, understanding where to shift priorities was useful to mitigate stress. My issues came in communicating that to other people. For example, my hockey coach would message me and say she desperately wanted me to play a match. So I'd sign up because I didn't want to let her down. It's this sort of internal battle you have between wanting to be the person that you are and understanding that priorities have to shift. Shifting priorities means you really have to focus on communicating with the people around you and setting those boundaries. Learn to say no. This is really hypocritical for me to say, and I know it's easier said than done. I'm still working on it. And I'm learning that setting priorities doesn't make you a bad person. Understand that yes, actions are representative of who you are. But if you burn out, you mentally and physically will not be able to be the person you want to be. And it's not embarrassing to be stressed. I will forever be anti-nonchalant. Have passion, use the opportunities on offer, and through that you will learn so much about yourself. I feel like it allows you to seek more. Social media will continuously tell you how to behave, how not to show stress, how to be this perfect person, but that is just so unrealistic. And we need to be reminded that all of these people looking so put together 24/7 and giving you all the revision tips on how they got all of their 9s at GCSEs and 4 A stars at A-level, they are not real. Especially during these periods of our growth in our teenage years, it can be difficult to feel like you're never quite enough. And that can make people avoidant or perfectionists. Both traits are really hard to deal with and can increase stress. Sometimes it's honestly a good idea to get out and touch grass, surround yourselves with things that are real. Finding the right tools to deal with stress can be hard. My dad always says, just relax. Some people find this really grounding and brings them down. I don't. There are 2 ways to help. An inward focus, which is when you can't control what is happening, you can control how you respond to it. This is used a lot in the context of stress, but what isn't spoken about is the fact that if you don't seek reframing your thoughts, you just can't do it. It's not about just a motivational quote. We can give people the toolbox to fix their stress, but ultimately, if they haven't recognized and accepted their stress and moved on to wanting to fix it, then those tools are just useless. And then we have the outward focus, which are the fixes or the toolbox. I used to use running to deal with stress. I was running competitively anyway, so I thought it was great. I'd be able to get a little more training and get all of the frustration and the tension out. So I would get on some fast-paced music and pound the pavement trying to beat Strava. Then I would get home, feel absolutely horrible about the time I'd just done, exhausted, and dreading the idea of sitting down to do more work. I still run to relieve stress, except now, when I run slowly. I jam to music that I like, I wear a cute little gym outfit, and I come back feeling accomplished and relaxed. I shifted my mentality from the stressed cross-country runner to running relaxed, and that took time. I had to recognize, reframe, and understand what I needed to do, and that sometimes required support. I also have a planner. Anyone who knows me knows I love my 365-day planner. It's from Amazon if anyone wants to know, because I can feel organized without piling up my day. I love it because I can see a month overview for big dates and a day-to-day. This means that I'm not looking at my week with disgust of what I have to do, and instead I'm actually excited. I use my planner, I vent to my mum to get things off my chest. I even sometimes try not to stomp off when my dad tells me to relax. And I treat myself every now and again, because what I've learned and what I'm still working on is that my priority is myself. I'm still motivated, I still want to succeed, and I still want to care for other people. But to get there, I need to look after myself. Everyone revises and relaxes differently. Maybe more online than others, and that's fine. Use the Duolingo. People don't like making flashcards, that's cool. Don't put the pressure on them to have stacks of notes and stacks of questions, as long as they're finding something that might work. It's all just a process. And at the end of the revision process for GCSEs, you have to wait the whole summer to get results, and it just drags you down. It's incredibly emotionally tough, and you have to prepare yourself for different scenarios. So I did this by just thinking through it. Others of my friends wanted to spend time talking through every exam in detail and spend every moment of the summer fretting about results. That's really hard for the person, and that's hard for the people around them. And all I can recommend is that know that you've done all that you can do. There isn't a way to change it now. Just be prepared to accept whatever comes to you, good or bad. Knowing this did keep me motivated during revision periods. It's a long slog, and to be able to reach the end of it, you must try to gain from the journey. I focus on the small wins. Everyone comes out of GCSEs, but what are the key things that you overcame? What have you learned about yourself? Champion each struggle that you beat, because it is a success. And know that your value comes from more than just the big goals. Thank you very much. And good luck.
Okay, thank you very much to Sophie for sharing her insights. And I know that as part of the student leadership team, she'll continue to champion the importance of having discussions about mental health and well-being as she works with both students and teachers. I'd like to begin my presentation, as Sophie did, by talking about the signs of stress. And by this, I mean stress which is problematic and having a negative impact upon a young person's life. As Sophie said, the signs will differ between people, and it can be hard to identify whether certain signs amount to stress, as many of the signs are normal parts of a teenage experience, or may be indicative of other things. However, if you spot them, it's worth noting them, interrogating them, thinking about what is happening for the young person at that time, and monitoring how long they last for. For example, at particular times in a girl's menstrual cycle, they may feel more irritable or find it hard to sleep, which is normal. But if this is happening for a prolonged period of time, along with also feeling hopeless and losing interest in food, it could be a sign of negative stress. To dig deeper into potential academic anxiety, the academic anxiety audit scale can be used to gauge how a student is feeling about their academics and the severity of their concerns. This can also be a useful way of starting a conversation with a young person about how they're feeling and any particular stress areas for them, which can then be addressed. For example, if they worry that their best is not good enough as what is expected from them, we can interrogate this and try to work with that young person to identify where those expectations are coming from, if they are what people expect of them, and to potentially myth bust this thought. Often, students are performing better than they think they are, or they may feel disappointed in themselves, but others are certainly not disappointed in them. Or in terms of feeling less confident than their classmates, students can often feel like they're the only ones who are struggling, whereas feeling less confident than others is a common experience. Then statements 2 and 3 are common causes of stress for many of our young people, namely procrastination and perfectionism, which I will turn to now. As we've already said, each young person is different, but there are often similarities. In terms of a perfectionist, they will often work long hours in the evenings and weekends. They will set very high expectations of themselves and will stay up late at night to keep working. But then, despite all of the hours of work that they put in, they will still feel like it is not enough. When we talk about perfectionists, Some people think that must be a great thing, as we are often told to strive for perfection. Many perfectionists may also receive praise from parents, carers, or teachers, which makes them even more intent on maintaining their high standards. However, the excessive drive to achieve ever higher levels of performance is self-defeating, as it leaves people with little chance of meeting their goals and feeling good about themselves. This is a paradox of perfectionism. It can lead to a sense of failure and have a negative impact on a sense of self-worth. In terms of managing perfectionism, one particular strategy is to encourage students to set a timer when completing their homework and stopping when the timer goes off. In terms of the homework expectations, these are on the screen now, and students are encouraged to only spend their allotted time on their homework. If they don't finish all of the homework tasks in this time, we would encourage them to talk to their teachers to say that they spent 30 minutes on it and this is what they managed to do. This is helpful for teachers because it may be that they are setting too much work, which they may not have realised at the time, or it may suggest that a student is not using the most effective strategies to complete the work in the allotted time, in which case that subject teacher can have a conversation with the students about how they approached it. We appreciate that some students may not feel confident in having these conversations though, in which case their tutors will be happy to advocate on their behalf. Students may also be reticent to hand work in that isn't perfect, but I would encourage students to do this because they will almost certainly discover that the outcome wasn't as bad as they were expecting. They may think that if they hand in an imperfect piece of work, that they'll be told off or that a teacher will think badly of them, but this will almost certainly not be the case if students have spent the allotted time on the work. The more comfortable students can get with not doing things perfectly, the better. And this is also an area that parents and carers can help with by modelling that they don't always do things perfectly. Try to communicate this with your child. For example, if you're cooking dinner and the vegetables aren't the optimum level of crunchiness, instead of apologising or getting annoyed at yourself for this, you can model being comfortable with imperfection by saying, the vegetables aren't as crunchy as I would have liked them, but never mind, they're still tasty. Another concept that we have introduced to students is that of the thinking traps, or you may have heard of them being referred to as cognitive distortions. This slide is taken from a Year 9 tutor time, which lists 5 common thinking traps. Thought filtering, where we focus on the bad and ignore the good. Labelling, using simple negative words to describe ourselves like stupid or a failure. Fortune telling, predicting how things will happen. For example, I'm going to fail this test. Catastrophizing, imagining the worst will happen and that we won't be able to cope. And finally, black and white thinking, where we think in extremes. On the screen now, you can see examples of thoughts which fall into each of the thinking traps. Once students recognise that they have had an unhelpful thought, we encourage them to reframe that thought. For example, I can't do maths becomes, there are some parts in maths that I find more difficult, but there are also parts I can do. I just need to do more practice. This isn't fixed. I can get better. To support with this at home, if a young person says a negative thought, can you gently challenge them to think about whether they may be falling into one of the thinking traps and whether they can reframe their thinking? Or similarly, can you model this when you have a negative thought and say, I've got a presentation tomorrow, and earlier on I was getting worried that no one was interested and that no one was going to turn up. I've already heard from one person to say that they can't make it. But I now realise that I was fortune telling and catastrophizing. Actually, a number of people said they're looking forward to it, and I'm sure that if someone can't come, it's probably because they've got another commitment. Tying into this, the idea of good enough can also help. You may have heard of the good enough parent, and the same applies here. Can students be encouraged to see what they have done is good enough? Again, perfectionists may be resistant to this, which is why it's useful to explain the idea of diminishing returns. This is also a slide that has been used with middle school students, which shows that there is a sweet spot to aim for. But if students keep working beyond that point, their productivity and outcomes will actually go down. Doing more isn't always better, as students will become fatigued and their quality of work will reduce. Then added to this, students may well not get as much rest and sleep. I won't spend too long on this, as there are already excellent forest-focused webinars which explore sleep in much more detail. But we know that sleep is vital for young people due to the countless benefits that it has. But in terms of academics, it is during sleep that our brains process what they've learned throughout the day and when information is consolidated. Sleep strengthens new memories, integrates them with existing ones, and allows the brain to reset for new learning. Not to mention the fact that if we have more good quality sleep, we'll be able to concentrate more in lessons and deal with any stress that comes up during the day. Therefore, do encourage students to develop the habits of good sleep hygiene, a regular bedtime, not exercising or eating too close to bed, no devices yet out before sleep, etc. Instead, encourage students to have a wind down routine, a warm bath, reading a book, journaling. Another common theme that we find with perfectionists is that they may have a wide range of extra commitments, which soon become overwhelming, and they need support in managing these commitments. In cases such as these, we will encourage a young person to reflect on whether they're doing too much, perhaps outline what their weekly schedule looks like. We can then discuss whether they need to step back from one of their commitments for a short while. For example, it may be that a student is particularly busy in a certain term, such as a sprinter who is busy during the summer term when the main athletics competitions take place, or a musician who may have a couple of concerts and an exam coming up, or an actor who is starring in a play. In which case, they may need help creating a bit of space for a few weeks. And as a school, we are happy to try to support, for example, negotiating extensions for work and only doing the work which is most important. Or there may be students who need to step back from an activity completely, in which case it'd be quite hard for a student to decide what to give up, particularly if they feel pressure from other people to do a certain activity. In such cases, a values exercise can be helpful. Students can be given a fulfillment wheel, like the one on screen. They then need to add in the different things that they spend their time doing. Once they've done this, they should reflect on how important each thing is to them and how much fulfillment they get from it. You can see that this person really values social time and singing. Then after that, school swimming, violin, academic subjects, and netball. Club swimming and dance are the areas that bring the least fulfillment. So it may be that that student carries on with school swimming, but stops club swimming. It's also important to remember that often there will have to be compromises. For example, it can be very difficult to be an elite sports person and get top grades in all academic subjects. So it's worth reflecting on what's most important to that young person so that they don't feel overwhelmed. Finally, although we'll come on to anxiety around exam time later on in this presentation, I just wanted to note that exams can be particularly stressful for perfectionists due to factors we've already mentioned, namely the high standards that they set for themselves and staying up late to complete work. However, the problem with revision is that it can never be completed. There is always more that can be done, more times that students can test themselves, more practice papers that they can complete. Therefore, aiming for perfect revision is setting oneself up to fail. This is where the concept of good enough is helpful again. At some point, they need to stop and trust in what they've done. I'd now like to move on from the perfectionist to the procrastinator, although it's worth bearing in mind that there can be crossover between the two. Namely, some perfectionists may be so afraid of failing and not being perfect that they procrastinate and don't do the work at all. But thinking about procrastinators more generally, they will often feel overwhelmed by everything that they have to do. They won't know where to start and will put off a task until the last minute, when they'll end up cramming and rushing the work, all the while feeling stressed about the work they need to do and worrying that the work they've done isn't good enough. With procrastination, understanding the science behind what is happening in the brain can be very helpful. I'm now going to show you a short video, it's about 3 to 5 minutes, which talks through how a feeling of stress can lead to procrastination.
It's 5 p.m. and you've just realized that report you've been putting off is due tomorrow. It's time to buckle down, open your computer, and check your phone. Maybe catch up on your favorite YouTube channel. Actually, you should probably make dinner first You usually like cooking, though it's hard to enjoy with this work hanging over your head. And, oh, it's actually pretty late. Maybe you should just try again in the morning. This is the cycle of procrastination, and I promise you, we have all been there. But why do we keep procrastinating even when we know it's bad for us? To be clear, putting something off isn't always procrastinating. Responsible time management requires deciding which tasks are important and which ones can wait. Procrastination is when we avoid a task we said we would do for no good reason, despite expecting our behavior to bring negative consequences. Obviously, it's irrational to do something you expect to harm you. But ironically, procrastination is the result of our bodies trying to protect us, specifically by avoiding a task we see as threatening. When you realize you need to write that report, your brain responds like it would to any incoming threat. Your amygdala, a set of neurons involved in emotional processing and threat identification, releases hormones, including adrenaline, that kick off a fear response. This stress-induced panic can overpower the impulses from your prefrontal cortex, which typically help you think long-term and regulate your emotions. And it's in the midst of this fight, flight, or freeze response that you decide to handle the threat by avoiding it in favor of some less stressful task. This response might seem extreme. After all, it's just a deadline, not a bear attack. But we're most likely to procrastinate tasks that evoke negative feelings, such as dread, incompetence, and insecurity. Studies of procrastinating university students have found participants were more likely to put off tasks they perceived as stressful or challenging, and the perception of how difficult a task is increases while you're putting it off. In one experiment, students were given reminders to study throughout the day. While they were studying, most reported that it wasn't so bad, but when they were procrastinating, they consistently rated the idea of studying as very stressful, making it difficult to get started. Because procrastination is motivated by our negative feelings, some individuals are more susceptible to it than others. People who have difficulty regulating their emotions and those who struggle with low self-esteem are much more likely to procrastinate, regardless of how good they are at time management. However, it's a common misconception that all procrastinators are lazy. In the body and brain, laziness is marked by low energy and general apathy. When you're feeling lazy, you're more likely to sit around doing nothing than distract yourself with unimportant tasks. In fact, many people procrastinate because they care too much. Procrastinators often report a high fear of failure, putting things off because they're afraid their work won't live up to their high standards. Whatever the reason for procrastination, the results are often the same. Frequent procrastinators are likely to suffer from anxiety and depression, ongoing feelings of shame, higher stress levels, and physical ailments associated with high stress. Worst of all, while procrastination hurts us in the long run, it does temporarily reduce our stress level, reinforcing it as a bodily response for coping with stressful tasks. So, how can we break the cycle of procrastination? Traditionally, people thought procrastinators needed to cultivate discipline and practice strict time management. But today, many researchers feel the exact opposite. Being too hard on yourself can layer additional bad emotions onto a task, making the threat even more intense. To short-circuit this stress response, we need to address and reduce these negative emotions. Some simple strategies include breaking a task into smaller elements, or journaling about why it's stressing you out and addressing those underlying concerns. Try removing nearby distractions that make it easy to impulsively procrastinate. And more than anything, it helps to cultivate an attitude of self-compassion, forgiving yourself and making a plan to do better next time. Because a culture that perpetuates this cycle of stress and procrastination hurts all of us in the long term. Speaking of forgiveness, how good are you at apologizing? Learn what it takes with this video. And for more actionable, science-based advice on how to build...
Thank you. So in summary, although it seems counterintuitive to respond to a big to-do list by not doing anything at all, scientifically, it makes sense. The mounting homework is perceived by the brain to be a threat, and because the brain is hardwired to protect us from threats, it will often run away from them and do something that feels safe, like scrolling on our phones. However, our brain is only thinking in the short term, and due to feeling stressed, it isn't thinking about the long-term consequences of not doing the work. For students who procrastinate, it's rare that they don't recognise the importance of doing the work, although this is the case with those classed as rebel procrastinators. Instead, it's perhaps precisely because they do see the importance of the work that they can feel stressed about it and put it off. So showing some empathy and understanding around procrastinators is really helpful. And in terms of solutions, it can be helpful to come up with strategies that make work feel safer and less threatening. If students are feeling overwhelmed, they can start by thinking, I just need to do 5 minutes. Then once they've done 5 minutes, they should ask themselves, could I do another 5 minutes? And normally they can, and so on. Then before they know it, they will have done 30 minutes. This is a strategy that I use when running. If I wake up and think, I now need to run 20 kilometers, that might feel too much. But if I tell myself, I just need to run 5K, and then I'll see how I feel, I can then keep adding on, particularly once I've found my rhythm and settled into my run. Another thing for procrastinators to bear in mind is that something is always better than nothing. They may not manage to complete that essay, but if they write the introduction, that's better than nothing. Again, the same is true of exercise. Something is better than nothing. And sometimes it's getting started and putting on those running shoes that is the hardest part. Then another way for students to feel more able to get started with their work is to think about their prime place and their prime time. In terms of prime place, where do students work best? We know from research that having a tidy space can help to keep the mind focused, rather than there being lots of distractions in the room. Similarly, having good light can help with focus, and obviously a quiet space. For many people, if there's lots of noise in the background, it can be harder to concentrate and stress can build. Although it's worth noting that some people like background noise, so it may be useful to have music on or a coffee shop sounds playlist. Then in terms of prime time, when do students work best? Are they more of an early bird or are they a night owl? If they are able to concentrate more in the mornings, it makes sense to do the majority of their work in the morning and then rest in the evening. Conversely, some students may really gain energy towards the end of the day. In terms of a revision, I encourage students to use knowledge of their prime time to help them to organise their schedules. They can do this by completing the matrix on the screen and then allocating their subjects to the most appropriate slots in the day. So in the example shown, this student enjoys RS, Spanish and English and finds them fairly easy to understand, whereas they find chemistry and physics hard and not that enjoyable. For this student, they may want to revise physics and chemistry when they are most alert, and RS, English and Spanish when they're getting more tired. As you can see here, the positions of different subjects on the matrix have then been correlated with the 3 columns in the table, namely proactive attention, attentive attention, and inactive attention. However, once again, what this looks like for each individual student will be different. Some students may want to start with something easy, for example, RS, because this is less threatening and stress-inducing. Then once they've built up some momentum, move on to trickier subjects like physics. However, others may want to get the hardest subjects out of the way and then reward themselves with something easier and enjoyable afterwards. This is known as eating the frog. Preparing for end-of-year exams in year 7 to 10 is a great time to try out what works best for each young person. And if something doesn't go to plan, they can learn from it, ready for when the stakes are higher. Having discussed revision in the context of perfectionism and procrastination, I'd now like to think about anxiety around exams more generally. First of all, it's important to put exams, or indeed any tests, into context. We are aware that students can feel anxious about common departmental assessments, more commonly known as CDAs, throughout the year. However, the purpose of the assessments is to highlight areas of strength and areas for development, so that teachers can then adjust their teaching or provide extra support. As such, they are diagnostic in nature, and as there is just one CDA per term, they only provide a snapshot of a student's progress. They don't define a student or dictate what they're capable of achieving. Due to the different nature of each CDA and the fact that they test students on different content, we also expect there to be fluctuations in performance, as students may be more confident with one particular topic or type of assessment over another. For example, they may excel at essay writing, but struggle when doing a presentation. Progress isn't always linear. This is communicated with students, and we regularly remind them that they are low stakes. However, we appreciate that any grading that a student receives or that is sent home to parents and carers can induce anxiety. It's worth saying at this point that we brought in CDAs a few years ago following feedback from students which said that the reporting schedule meant that they ended up having mini exam weeks, which caused stress. Hence why the CDAs were brought in, which could be sat at any point throughout the term in order to space them out. Similarly, last year, students told us that having a CDA in every subject each half term was challenging. So this year, we've reduced the number of CDAs down to one per term to help to support student wellbeing. The purpose of end-of-year exams is then similar to CDAs, in the sense that they are diagnostic in nature. Similarly, there are also an opportunity for students to experiment with different revision strategies and approaches to managing their revision, embedding good habits early on. And if a strategy doesn't work very well, then far from that exam being a failure, they've actually learned a really important lesson which will help them in the future, thus making the experience a success. For those in years 10 and 12, end-of-year exams then encourage students to make revision resources and put information into their long-term memories, ready for year 11 and year 13. Finally, the process of sitting end-of-year exams is useful practice for when students get to the exam years, as it makes sure that they understand the regulations surrounding exams and are practiced in how to conduct themselves. Similarly, as I explained earlier, stress can be reduced if students feel more comfortable. So one important purpose of end-of-year exams is to act as a dress rehearsal or a practice for external exams. We want students to get used to the conditions of sitting in a room in silence with times on a board and a clock ticking, so that they feel more comfortable in this environment when they get to the higher stakes external exams. So it's important for students to understand exams in this context. Parents and carers can play an important role here in reinforcing the message and by not placing a heavy emphasis on the outcomes. Although useful indicators of progress, they are not the be-all and end-all. That being said, we are aware that exam anxiety is a very real concern, and even if all messaging from teachers, parents and carers is one of encouragement, reassurance, and trying to remove undue pressure, there's still a well-known narrative within society that exams are something to fear, much like going to the dentist, regardless of what the reality might be. So how might academic anxiety around exams manifest itself? We can split the symptoms into four main sections: physical, cognitive, behavioural, and emotional, as seen on the screen. As is the case with stress, noticing the symptoms is an important first step. However, young people might need some help with identifying them, so talking to them is important when they're about to do a test. Can you ask them, how do they feel in their body? What emotions do they experience? How does it affect them? How does it affect their brain? Another thing to think about is what is causing the anxiety, as this will tie into which strategies will be most helpful in response. Possible causes could be perceived pressure. This can come from external sources like parents, carers, peers or teachers, or internal pressures related to self-expectations. Fear of failure. Students may worry about grades, test scores, or not meeting expectations, which can trigger anxiety. Lack of study skills. Poor study habits or a lack of effective strategies can increase anxiety about academic performance. And finally, social factors. Social pressure to succeed can contribute to anxiety, especially if students feel that they are falling behind. In terms of then supporting students, as mentioned at other points in my presentation, it is useful to reassure students that feelings of anxiety around exams are perfectly normal and to be expected. However, what we want to avoid is stress that feels too overwhelming. As we saw when looking at procrastination, our brains are hardwired to monitor for threats, and if a threat is perceived, the brain goes into survival mode. Earlier in the evolution of humans, threats might include threats to life, such as a tiger on the prowl. But in modern society, our problem isn't that a tiger is going to hunt us down. We don't really have daily threats to our safety. Instead, it's problems like friendships, a big football game, or test results that scare us. However, our brains and bodies respond in the same way no matter what the trigger. And when we feel stressed or like we're being threatened, our evolutionary safety mechanism kicks in. When a threat is detected, the amygdala, the region of the brain responsible for emotional processing, sends a distress signal to the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus then activates the sympathetic nervous system, which triggers the fight or flight response. This response involves the release of stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol, which prepare the body for action by increasing the heart rate, breathing, and alertness, which explains the physical symptoms a student might experience before a test. Sometimes stress can be a really positive thing. Just like before a race, our body being flooded with adrenaline can be helpful and can improve our performance. Like in a race, the key is putting these nerves to positive use or learning to manage them so that they don't hinder performance. As we've seen, an increase in stress causes an increase in heart rate. To help to bring the heart rate down, breathing exercises can help, such as box breathing or the 4-7-8 strategy shown on the screen now. However, for some people, this doesn't always help, as focusing on the breath can cause increased panic, so it depends on the person. Another strategy is to practice putting yourself under a bit of pressure. Earlier, I explained how end-of-year exams are helpful in preparing students for external exams, as they provide an opportunity to practice in a safe environment. This can then be applied to other tests. If students are anxious about exams, I would encourage them to practice at home, an environment that feels safe. This might look like printing a past paper, then completing it at the kitchen table with a clock showing the time, a start and end time written on a piece of paper, and then parents or carers in the background just looking over the young person's shoulder every once in a while. If students become anxious, they can then practice the breathing techniques, and hopefully this will help them to feel more used to dealing with anxious feelings. As well as physical symptoms, students can struggle with cognitive symptoms, such as mind blanks, which can be distressing and frustrating. On the screen now, you can see a 5-step plan from a clinical psychologist, which aims to help with mind blanks. The steps are as follows. Number 1, notice the thoughts and how you feel in your body. Number 2, send your mind and body signals that you are safe. Notice your feet on the floor, your bum on the seat, and your hands on the desk. Number 3, find a rectangle shape in the room. Follow the rectangle with your eyes. Whilst following the short sides, breathe in. Whilst following the long sides, breathe out. Number 4, look around the room. Notice 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can feel, 2 things you can smell. And number 5, continue to breathe in a calm way. You should start to feel calmer and less anxious. Now focus in on the next question you need to tackle in the exam. If thoughts turn up again, notice them. Notice they are just thoughts. Keep your breathing calm and steady. Tell yourself that you are okay. You are safe. As part of the final step, we can see the idea of noticing thoughts, interrogating them, and challenging them, much like with the thinking traps. A similar strategy can be used here. If a young person notices a negative thought, they can halt the spiraling thoughts by mentally shouting stop, or picturing a road stop sign or traffic lights on red. Once the person has literally stopped the thoughts, they can then continue planning or practice a relaxation technique. Or finally, I'd recommend the use of positive affirmations for some students. When anxiety or panic sets in and students give themselves negative messages, I can't do this, I'm useless, it can be very effective to consciously replace those negative thoughts with positive ones. This is just anxiety, it can't hurt me. Relax, concentrate, it's going to be okay. I'm getting there, nearly over. Similarly, derived from meditation, a mantra is a word or phrase which you repeat to yourself, saying something like calm or relax, under your breath or in your head over and over again can help to reduce anxiety. Reminding students that they've revised, they know the content, and to trust in the process can also help. However, if the exam hasn't gone to plan, encourage them not to dwell on it, which is also true if the exam has gone well. Try to find ways to unwind, which might entail having a meal together or watching a film. And before the exam results come out, can you tell your child that you're proud of them for how they've approached the exams, how they've revised independently, or how they've kept going despite feeling nervous? This way, your praise isn't dependent on the final grade, but is recognising good habits and the effort put in. Then in terms of other final guidance that I would like to give on how parents and carers can support at home, 2 points that I would just like to reiterate are the power of positive role modelling and developing a dialogue with your child. If your child is feeling stressed, can you role model how you deal with stress? Talk openly about how you cope with your own stressful situations so that your child has a positive role model for managing their emotions and time. You might even talk about a time when you haven't responded particularly well. Having an open dialogue can be so helpful, but we appreciate this can be difficult, particularly with teenagers who are trying to develop their independence, who may feel embarrassed to talk about things that aren't going well, or who aren't used to being vulnerable and having difficult conversations. And sometimes your child may not want to talk at all, in which case it's important that we don't force them to have a conversation that they don't want to have. However, do make yourself available for when they're ready. Or you may find that your child opens up in situations where they feel less pressure. For example, when you're in the car or during a walk. These situations work particularly well as you're side by side rather than facing one another. Finally, it may be useful to delay the conversation to a time when the young person isn't feeling as stressed, as they may well be able to engage more effectively. Or I'd recommend having these conversations before any serious signs of stress. If you want to try to open up a conversation, in terms of questions that you can ask, there are some examples on the screen now, which are all open questions focused on being curious, supportive, and non-judgmental. I'll just leave these on the screen for a few seconds for you to have a read through. I hope that these strategies are useful. It may well be that not all of them work for a particular young person, but hopefully having a range of tools in a young person's toolkit will mean that they are prepared when stressful feelings become overwhelming. As ever, we are very much here to support our young people, and if you think your child is struggling, please do reach out to tutor or heads of house as the first point of contact, and they can check in with them and point them towards any further support that they might need, such as Place to Be and our other digital partners, which you can see on the screen now. Similarly, if you have any further questions about the content of this presentation, do feel free to email me. My email address is on the screen now. Equally, if you have any tips or strategies that have worked well with your child and which you think others would benefit from, then I'd love to hear from you as well. Wishing our young people all the very best with their exams and academic journeys, and thank you very much for listening.